welcome. I am so excited to be doing another mitten today. This one I think is super fun. So here it is. This is my first one. This is the left hand mitten. I chose to do it in a yarn that has a bit of an ombre naturally. So I really love the way that this turned out. This is super fun. I'm so excited to show you how to do this today. Today I will be demonstrating the right hand mitten on camera. I'm going to only be going through the most critical parts because watching me do row after row of color work will get quite boring, I promise. So let's get started in talking about the supplies. So when it comes to the supplies, of course, the quality of yarn matters. I think when we look at this one especially, we know that it really comes down to the yarn that we are using. So let's go ahead and talk about that first, because I'm sure you are curious what yarn this is. This is the We Crochet Fingering Chroma yarn. Now they sell lots of different color varieties of this yarn, a lot of different ombres, but then they also sell some solids. So they do sell a solid natural tone that's more like a cream, and then they have a black and a gray. I really like stocking up on these, especially when they come on sale. They are an amazing yarn. But I am going to also be talking about how to use yarn that works as an ombre on its own. A lot of times when it comes to getting the right color changes exactly where you want, it doesn't always naturally happen the way we wish it would. I didn't have to do too much with this yarn. It actually worked out amazingly, but I'm going to give you a few tips on using this yarn and getting this style of look. I also think, however, if you just worked this in two tones, so say you chose to do the unicorn in pink or purple or blue, solid, that would be really cute as well. To use the chroma, however, I started by taking the yarn and cutting it. Yes, before I even started into this, we cut. So I pulled the yarn to about where I wanted it to start with the green, because if I used all this section of green in here, it would be too much. It would be about this much of the glove versus starting with this much. So I ended up cutting the yarn, which I will do again today, and starting with the appropriate amount I think I'll need before I want that color change. It's a little bit of a guessing game, so I tried to keep track, a little bit more conscious about that, so that I can remember where to cut and how to cut for the second one. And to do that, I kept the scraps. So all of these are kind of the leftover colorways that I didn't end up using because I cut some out of here to get those faster color changes. It worked out perfectly. I can always use this yarn for something else, but I really wanted to make sure I got all the colors of the rainbow into this. So what I did is I started with the green, and then as you see it faded into the yellow. That worked out great. But once I got into the yellow, this actually has a really large section of yellow again. So I ended up cutting out a section of the yellow and skipping it, and then it continued on to here. And then I ended up cutting out a small section again in this area to get a faster color change. And then I was fine to go until I got to this blue up here. So if you are planning on doing this type of color work, just be conscious of where and how you want to change your colors. Even with this glove, it's not perfect, or the thumb, it's not perfect, but I think it did a pretty good job. Because we come back and we work the thumb later, I ended up cutting into this yarn a little bit more again and doing my own planned color changes to see if I could get it to match this background as best as possible. And so that was really fun to do so. So let's then now talk about how we will work this mitten, and then we will talk about the other supplies. So with this mitten, we actually do not start with a cuff. We will be chaining the amount of stitches that we need and then working from bottom to top and decreasing at top. We'll leave an opening for the thumb that we will come back and work later. And then after we've done all that, we will come back at the very end and we actually work this cuff last. The reason why is I feel like having a cuff here, it can get in the way when you're working with it, especially when it comes to weaving in your ends and stuff. I find it's best to do last. It's also a way that you can come back and adjust the length of the cuff you want after you know where this glove is going to hit you on your hand or your arm. So that's how we will work this. Now let's talk about the rest of the supplies. You will definitely need some scissors, at least one stitch marker. I got away with one, but if you just want to have a couple around because you commonly lose them in your couch like I have and find them later when they poke you. And then you'll need a crochet hook. The reason why I have two here, I just wanted to show you some of my favorite from Fairisle Crochet. This is the Alpha series. This is the one I used to work this up. So I'll use it again because you always want to stay consistent and keep the same hook no matter what brand it is for your entire project. But I also wanted to show you that I kind of regret not using this one. I really, really love the candy shop hooks from Fairisle as well. And I thought it would have been super fun to have that pop of color. These are both the size F, but like I said, just stay consistent. So here's a couple options you can get from Fairisle. They also have some other hooks that you might be interested in looking at too. So this is the candy shop and the Alpha lines. Then after you've got your crochet hook in the size F, you'll also want a needle to weave in your ends because there will be some ends to weave in. And then you're ready to dive in. So let's get started and we will start on our first row. Now for this pattern, you will need two different styles of yarn. So color A will be our darker color, or it can be lighter, whatever you choose for your color combinations. And I can't wait to see what you choose. And B. So this will be called A and this will be called B. We will start with round one with our color A. To do so, we are going to chain a total of 48 stitches with our size F hook. Now that we have chained 48, we are going to make sure this isn't twisted and we are going to go back and work in the round. So I'm going to join these and then work in the round for the very first round by single crocheting into each stitch around. Now, we will be working in the round continuously, which means we will not be joining at the end of each round. We'll just keep going and going. There will be no join and chain one for this. It's continuous. So I will always want to mark that first stitch. As you get going with your color work, you'll be able to tell better which is the first stitch in the round, but especially at first, it can get really confusing. So you will always want to use a stitch marker at the first stitch of every single round so that you know where you're at. And now for the first round, we are just going to simply, with color A, single crochet into each stitch around. As you can see, I'm kind of having a little trouble here. It's because I like to take the extra time to get into the back bumps of my work. What I mean by that is, like, on the top side you see these V's and on the bottom side there's a back bump. I prefer to work in the back bumps for my first round when I'm doing it this way. It's just my favorite. The other thing you can do is you could foundation single crochet this round if you'd like. I find that it looks a little bit different just because of the style of stitch we're going to. I think for this instance, chaining and working into the back hump is the most clean look, but there's different ways to do it. You may be better at foundation single crocheting than I am, since sometimes I tend to avoid it even though I shouldn't. And then what I want to know is, as you're working these single crochet stitches around, notice I'm going very slow here, and that's okay. I want you to remember color work takes time, especially when you're working small yarn like this. Be sure to enjoy the process and not always rush through it. I have always accepted that color work will take more time than anything else, and that's okay. I just want to give you that reminder. Color work will take more time to do than most other crochet projects. Just be okay with that. That's why it's so beautiful. Go with that process. This also takes a little bit more time that I've accepted in these type of projects because I tend to pause. Now, it's like a millisecond that I pause once I get going, and I promise this goes faster after the first row, especially when we're not just working with all dark yarn. But I will pull up and kind of pause and then yarn over and finish. That way I have enough space to get into the next time. So I'm going to finish this round and come back for round two. All right, now I'm back. We've done round one and we are ready for round two. So when it comes to round two, all of our stitches from here on out will be worked as split single crochets, also known as the waistcoat stitch, and in the center of the stitch. So I've already done my first stitch because I'm showing how, like, we've already joined, I'm working around, but I want you to notice there is a bit of a jog here because we're working continuous. It's pretty small, so don't worry about it. When we weave in this end, we can kind of even that out, and we'll work the cuff and hide that as well. So I've done my first stitch in the round. I just want to show you how to do a split single crochet because that's what we will be using from here on out. And if this is kind of small to see, we can also go to my other tutorial on my blog where I'm using a larger hook and yarn. So to do a split single crochet, on the front of all these stitches, if you can see, and I'm also going to pull over this, there will be a V. So this is what the front of our stitch looks like. It's those V's. And if you notice, the stitch above it works into the center of that V from front to back. So you'll have strands in here that you'll want to work through. So you want to go in between those two center V's, and even in the back, there will be an upside down V. You want to make sure you're working through the center of all of those strands. Yarn over, pull up a loop, and the loop that you pull up, once again, I would not want to complete the stitch yet. I want to pull that loop up to be the same height. You want to give this, the more space you give this, the better. Then I will yarn over and complete that stitch. Now, to do the color work, because our color work does start on this row, we can go by the written instructions, or we can also go by a chart. If you notice, I do have a chart for the pattern. This is a paid pattern, so you can find it in there and print it if you like, or I also do have a written instruction as well in the pattern, so you can go with whatever you are most comfortable with. So if you notice right here, this is row 2. I'm working from right to left, and the first 3 stitches will be color A, and then the next 4 stitches will be color B, and then 4 in color A, 4 in color B, so on and so forth all the way across, and we work continuous and keep working from right to left. So to do this, I've done my first 2 stitches in the color A. I'll do my 3rd stitch in the color B, and then it's time for me to change colors. So to change colors, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. I pulled up a loop and I'm going to stop. In order to change colors, I have to yarn over with my new color. When you yarn over and pull through your new color, that really is the best way to go. It's a more seamless way to change colors. So I'm going to get ready for my first color and then show you that. So now that I have sectioned off this yarn in a way that I think will work for me, I am going to go ahead and change colors and do the next 4 stitches in color B. So notice I've yarned over and I've stopped, and now I'm going to yarn over with my new color to finish out this stitch. What that does is it makes it so now I'm ready to work my next stitch in my new color, and I'll still be doing that split stitch, and I will be working 4 stitches with the color B. Now where we are doing mittens and we have fingers going into them and fingers can catch on yarn, which we don't want to have, I don't let my yarn on the back travel for very far. I tend to do no more than 3 stitches. So where I'm doing 4 here, I will catch my color B by laying it over my hook on the back and crocheting around it, and that will trap it. That way it's not being carried as far as 4 stitches when I'm working my color B. So let me show you what that looks like in here. You're gonna see a few ends because I haven't like weaved them in yet. But as you see, I don't have my floats or my carries that last very long. 3 stitches at most, even less. I usually go every other stitch on the thumb. But that way when I stick my fingers in here, they're not catching on strands where that would be uncomfortable and it would be hard to get your hand into it. So that's why when I'm working more than 3 stitches in a row of one color, I will simply catch that yarn on the back so that it's really clean on the inside. And now that I am on my 4th stitch in color B, it's time for me to change colors again. So I am not going to finish this stitch yet. I'm going to grab my color A, and weaving them in these first beginning ends can be helpful just to get them out of the way. But I'm going to grab my color A, yarn over with my color A, kind of tug down a little bit on that color B, and now I'm ready to go back to my color A for 4 stitches. So this is what we will do around and around and around. We're just going to be working that color work based on the chart. This first round is very tedious, especially when you don't have much to kind of grab and hold and to work on. As you keep going, you'll find that you will pick up speed a little bit. These first few rounds, be patient with yourself. Even for me, I just completed the first mitten not that long ago, and so I should be in the groove, but it's hard on these first few rounds. So do not feel like it's a race. Take your time. Notice I'm catching that yarn again of my color B because I don't want to carry it more than a couple stitches. And then work your way around. So here's what I'm going to do. This would get very boring on camera if I did this all on camera. I'm going to go work this up through the thumb. So I'm going to come back about a row before the thumb and show you what we will do next. So for one, I will have more stitches to demonstrate, and then also we'll get to that part on how to handle that thumb. All right, now I'm back and we are on round 20 and we're ready to create the hole for the thumb for the right hand. If you notice on the chart, there is a gap, I guess you could say. Like there's a spot where it's just blank white, as you see there on round 20, and that white part is where we're going to chain that many stitches using our color A. So to get started for this round, I will be first single crocheting the split single crochet into the first stitch with color A. And I hope you've noticed that as you've gotten further along in this, that it's much easier to do this color work with the more you have to grab. So I've done my first stitch. I'm going to go ahead and mark it. And now I'm going to chain the next 11 stitches and skip 11 stitches. And then I'll skip 11 stitches and then do a split single crochet into the next in the color A. Now we're already needing to switch to our color B, and in order to do this, to make it not float that far, we will need to fasten off and reattach our yarn. And I don't mind doing this right here, especially because these ends, we're going to kind of pull it down. Those ends that were like these new ends will help us weave in any gaps we may have, because as you'll see later when we start to do the thumb, we'll build the thumb out in this area. There might be a small hole on the right and left, and these strands can be used to close those holes. So now I'm going to be doing my next stitch in my color B, and then the next two in color A. So I will keep working round 20, just like the chart or the written instructions say to do. And then when I get back around this round and I'm on to the next round, I just want to quickly show you how to work this on round 21. So now that I have worked my way all the way back around, it's time for me to start round 21. And this is where we will be working across these chain stitches. So we'll still be doing this exact same color work as round 21 calls for. It's just that we'll be working some of those into the chain stitches. So I'll start by doing my first color as the color A, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch in this round. And then the next stitches will still work our color work changes. So my next stitch will be in the color B, but we're not going to be able to do our split single crochets because we've got chain stitches to work into. So for this round, we're just going to work into the chains. And then on the next round, we'll be able to resume the split single crochets all the way around our round. So it's not anything different in terms of the color work. It's really not too hard. It's just simply remembering that we're still continuing the color work, and each chain stitch is going to count as a stitch we needed to work into. I like to catch that bottom hump if you can't tell. I really enjoy the way it looks a lot of times when I do this across, and I'll go through this bottom hump on the bottom. So as you can see, I make sure that that V is still on the top of my hook there. and I've got the bottom hump underneath there. And that's just the way I prefer to do it. It's just the way I look. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way to that. It's just what I prefer. So now that I've made it across these chain stitches, I'll simply go back to working in those split single crochets. It's quite easy now at this point to do so. Once again, the split single crochets is more of an intermediate technique. So if this is your first time doing color work, I might actually recommend a different project because these split single crochets does take a lot of practice with tension. Tension is the most critical thing when it comes to working these stitches. So I worked my way across. I'll keep working the rest of this round. And as you can see on this chart, I've worked those stitches in pattern all the way across those empty white blank space. And that way it looks really nice. And we have an area to come back later and work the thumb. Now I'm going to do the next rounds until we start decreasing off camera, simply because it was probably pretty boring for you to watch me do all of this color work row by row. That's not a lot of fun. So keep working, and when we get back to the round that begins doing those decreases, I'm going to come back and show you how to decrease. Until then, enjoy the process. Enjoy working the color works. Enjoy watching the picture, the unicorn especially, show up every row after you do. It's so fun to see how it's going. It's almost like doing yarn printing to me, where you're printing an image round by round, and it's really fun to see the unicorn work up here. So come on back when it's past this main bulk area, and right when we start to decrease for this top part, this is where I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about how to do those decreases for the top of your hand. But all of this area I'm going to let you work up on your own, and as you notice, these are mirrored. That way when you wear them, the unicorns are facing each other, which I thought would be really, really cute to do. And I like this cute little hearts on the bottom, and I can't wait. You can see where we're going. It's so fun to watch these work up. I cannot wait to see how yours does as well. So go relax, watch your favorite show, and come on back when we're ready to decrease. Now notice as I work this up, we do have a slight lean going on. This is where blocking will really help take that out, especially when you wear it and you put your thumb in, it will pull that back a little bit as well. But at the very end, I highly recommend blocking these mittens. I actually have mitten blockers that are really helpful for this, and I will show you that later. So now we are ready, and we are at the point where we will be decreasing on the sides of the mittens. Now for this first round of decrease, we are not going to be decreasing all the way across, but let's get started on that. So as we take a look at this chart, these symbols represent a decrease. We are currently going to be doing round 44, and we will end up decreasing by 2 stitches. Then on each round after that, we will be decreasing by 4 stitches. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's how we will decrease until we get to the very tip of the hand. So on round 44, it starts the same way. We're not decreasing quite yet. If you have obviously a stitch marker, go ahead and throw it in there. I'm going to grab one. As I was doing a lot of these rounds, I was just following that line that marked my first stitch, but now we're moving that. So I definitely want to make sure I keep track of the first stitch in my round, especially where I'm decreasing. So we're going to work across row 44 until we get across to this side, and then we will decrease. Now it's time that I decrease the next 2 stitches together. To do so, we will still be entering our hook into the center of that V on the front. So it'll still be worked as a split single crochet, but a split single crochet decrease. So I pulled up 2 loops in the center of those next 2 stitches, I will yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on the hook, and I have decreased by 1 stitch. I'm going to keep working across this round and decreasing again at the end, but I'm going to come back because I want to show you when we come back again and we're doing more decreases how you handle this stitch on the next round. All right, now I'm coming to the end of round 44. So once again, I'll do another decrease on this round. And then this is the very end of round 44. We've decreased by 2 stitches. Now we're moving on to round 45. And on this round, we will be decreasing by 4 stitches. So in this very first stitch of the round, I will do a decrease. And I do find it's important when you're doing your decreases, grab that secondary color because it just is good to kind of tuck that yarn into what will be the corners of this mitten. So there's my first decrease of round 45. I'm going to mark that as the first stitch in my round. And then I'm going to continue to follow the color work until I come to the next part, either in the written instructions or on the chart where it's time to decrease again. All right, so now it's time for me to decrease again, and this time I will be doing 2 decreases right next to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook into the next stitch, and then the next one I'm going to insert my hook into is this one that we had previously decreased. So what I like to do is get my hook right into the center of this decrease. Sometimes you have to finagle it in through the first loop and then in between the V-stitch of that stitch kind of hiding behind there now. Pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all the loops. And then I'll simply decrease the next 2 stitches as well, but be sure when you're doing these decreases to grab that second color, the color B, lay it over your hook and lock it into those sides because that will help not have any fingers catching on any strands when we insert our hands into these mittens. So now I've done the 2 decreases there, and now I will continue the rest of this round, and I have 1 more decrease on this other side. Now that I come to the end, I have 2 stitches left, which is perfect because I have 1 more decrease to do. So I will decrease that last decrease of this round, and I've decreased by 4 stitches. And so I'll just keep going in that way, where now on round 46, I'll decrease by 4 stitches again. And it basically is decreasing on these sides. You can kind of already see where it's starting to lean in. Now to lean in almost like a V to the point of the mittens. So I'm going to let you continue to do those decreases. On the very last decrease, I will say, as you get towards this tip, it gets a little bit difficult and fickly in terms of you're just working in such a small, tight space. So take your time on that. And as you get towards the tip here, don't worry if there's a few gaps. As you're decreasing on these sides, you can always use your yarn end to kind of close those gaps a little bit towards the top. So decrease until you get to the tip, and then I'll show you how to close that opening. So now that we have decreased to this point, it is time to fasten off, and then we still have a hole here that we won't want, so we'll want to weave this closed. How I do this is I go through the front loops of each remaining stitch. And you're just going to weave through those front loops. Sometimes I'll do more than one at a time, all the way around. And once you've gone through all 6, you simply tug it and it closes that hole at the top. Now, what I also like to do is just when I go ahead and I'm weaving in this end because I no longer need it, I'll kind of clean up anything if there's any gaps along this side, because sometimes decreasing, especially if this is your first time, you might have a few holes down here. I've had quite a bit of practice, so mine's pretty tightly done. But if you had a few holes, this is your time to go ahead and take your yarn needle and then weave through and close any other gaps, fix any other blemishes. That's the nice thing about crochet, is it is very flexible. Don't panic if you have a few holes down here, because they're very easy to whip stitch closed. Now it is time for us to work on this thumb area. So we have this opening and we're ready to work a thumb. We will be working a thumb starting at the bottom right for either mitten. We'll start at the bottom right of the thumb opening and we'll be working around continuously. So once again, we're just working around continuously. This mitten is the thumb is worked in the same way as the mitten, where we're just kind of creating a tube, and then we will decrease at the top, just like we did for the top here. So we're just almost creating like a little mini mitten for our thumb. To do this, if you are using a color changing yarn, I went ahead back to my scraps that I kind of had cut off earlier from what I was using as I changed in here. And I'm going to pick that up again, and I'm going to try to match these areas of the thumb color-wise as well. It is more work in terms of weaving in your ends, but if you really, really want this look, it tends to be a bit more work. So for the thumb, let's go ahead and take a look at the chart. Now when working this, we'll start at the bottom right. So the first color will be color B, and we will always be working from right to left on this chart. So our thumb will start at the bottom right and we'll work continuously. So on this chart, for every round, we start at the right side, working to the left, and then towards the top, we will decrease just as we did on the body. Now I will start with my color B and I will attach to this bottom right. I'm going to do a slip stitch because I find it moves too much on me if I don't. And then I will do my split single crochet, and this will be the stitch that I will mark. But before I mark it, I want to yarn over with my next color and pull it through as well. That way I have my very first stitch. I'm going to grab my stitch marker. I always have some laying around here. It's probably different from the one I used before. And I'm going to mark that first stitch. And now I can keep on going. I'm going to take the tail ends and just go ahead and tuck them into the thumb part of this mitten. It just gets them out of the way, which makes it a little bit easier not having so many strands laying around. So now the next 3 stitches are in color A. So working in that split stitch, I'm going to work the next 3 in color A. And for the mittens, I actually like to catch the yarn about every other stitch for the thumb, because I really don't want my thumb to catch on any strands on the inside. And now I'm going to switch back to color A for 2. And then, or sorry, color B for 2, then color A for 2. Then back to color B for 2. Once again, this very first round of the thumb will feel a little bit difficult because we're just kind of grabbing in weird spaces, but the more you work in length, the easier it gets. And now we're going to be doing quite a few in color A. But the thing is, you notice right here, we technically only have 1 stitch left on this side. We will move from here to here. So we're working around that opening using each stitch. So for the rest of this round, we will be using the color A, but catching the color B because we've got to get it back for the next round towards the beginning of the round. So for this next stitch, I'll do the last one on this side of the thumb. And now, yep, I'm going to rotate this, and come all the way to the next available stitch. I still try to work in that center, but it's on the inside of your thumb. You don't really see if there looks like to be a small seam. And I am going to also catch the yarn of the color B so that it stays tucked in. And now I'll keep on going across. So I just want to note, you probably have a little hole right here. That's completely normal. We will use our ends to weave that in later. Any small holes can be fixed. So now work to the end of this round with color A, and you should have a total of 22 stitches. Now that we've worked our way around our first round, it's time to start our second round. So I'm going to turn here, and as you get going and this gets more pronounced, this will get easier to see, but we're not joining. Remember, we're working continuously. So actually on my last stitch here, what I want to do is I want to join my color B and get ready for the first stitch here. And once again, we're going to be creating a little bit of a hole here, and that's totally fine. I'm going to move my stitch marker, and now I'm going to do the very first stitch in the second round. So that will be with my color B. And now I'm going to switch to my color A for the next stitch and go ahead and mark the first stitch of round 2 so that I can keep track. As you get going, you may not need your marker because you'll know that this is a line here. That's your first stitch of the round, but for now I highly suggest keeping with those stitch markers. And that's the concept of the thumb. So I'll just keep working around, following the chart or the written instructions, and creating the thumb and decreasing towards the top. The decrease will be done in the exact same way as this and closed in the exact same way. So I'm going to let you go create this thumb. As you can see here, it's just a tube that creates and decreases. So I'm going to let you go create this fun thumb, and then we'll come back for the cuff. Now that we've finished off the thumb, the exact same way we finished off this part of the mitten, we are ready to work on the cuff. This will be our last step, and then it will be ready to be worn. When working the cuff, it will make this ribbing that really brings it in and fits it around your arm, which makes your mitten stay on. To do this, we will start by joining our yarn in on the side in the most inconspicuous spot as possible, and I join with a slip stitch. Notice we still have this little nub right here where we first started. By doing this ribbing the way it's done around the edges, it really hides that, and you won't really be able to tell where you started your mitten. So the first thing I will do is I'll join with a slip stitch, and then I'm going to chain 14 stitches. Now that I've chained 14 stitches, I'm going to slip stitch in the back loop only of the second stitch and across. So if you look at this top V, we're only going to be slip stitching into this back part of that top V. Now that I've slip stitched 13 stitches, I will slip stitch 2 stitches from the edge. and then I'm going to turn my work, and we're going to be working right back down those 13 stitches. So I will skip the 2 stitches I just did from the edge, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the back loop only. All of these stitches will be slip stitched into the back loop only, down the 13 stitches again. And now that I have slip stitched into the back loop only of those 13 stitches, I'm going to turn, chain 1, and then repeat those 2 rows all the way down. So I'll slip stitch in the back loop only down the side, and then 2 stitches from the body, turn and skip the 2 stitches from the body and slip stitch in the 13 stitches in the back loop only, turn, chain 1, and do it again. So it's just repeating those 2 rows again and again so that it creates that ribbing. You'll work it all the way around your mitten, and then come on back and I will show you how to join your starting edge with your finishing edge. So it's just a lot of slip stitching. It does take a little bit of work. If you don't like slip stitches, you can substitute for a single crochet in the back loop only, but you'll need to do less rows and skip some from the body so that it doesn't end up being too wide. You really do want this to fit onto your arm snug so that your mitten stays on. So this is a little bit of work, but I love the look of it and I think it's worth it. So continue to do those 2 rows until you've built up your ribbing, and then we'll come back to show you how to join. Now that I've worked the cuff all the way around doing the slip stitch ribbing, it's time to join our current edge with our starting edge. And to do so, we're going to still be working in these 13 stitches in the back loop, and then we're also going to be catching the loop from the first edge. So I chained 1, and I will insert my hook through the back loop of my current edge, and then go ahead and catch the loop from the first beginning edge. And you slip stitch those together. So we simply do that all the way down, going through both of the loops and slip stitching. Do that for the 13 stitches. Now we can fasten off our yarn and simply weave in our end. And now we have a beautiful pair of mittens. So to take out some of this curve or curl here where our stitches are shifting, I have these awesome mitten blockers. These were I purchased on Etsy from just a custom Etsy shop. I absolutely adore them. This piece comes off and is for the thumb, and I will do a wet blocking with these usually, simply because I find that whenever you do have something that's shifting, a wet blocking usually is best. And so once I get this on here, I'll kind of straighten it out, straighten out my stitches there, and then spray it down and let it dry. I'm so excited you joined me today. I hope you love your mittens and you wear them during those chilly months. This was such a fun project to create. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I really love having all of you over here on YouTube as well as on my blog, so be sure to follow along for some more fun stuff. And I hope to see you again soon.